Part 1. Meet the Starfleet's most baffling, most mocked, and somehow most enduring science vessel. A ship that spent over a century making engineers scratch their heads and fans argue in comment sections. Now picture this. The year is 2295, and you are a civilian scientist aboard one of these things. You are in the lower section, buried deep inside the ship's primary sensor bay, pulling extraordinary data from a red giant star that is about to collapse and go nova. Then the alarm sounds. Solar flare activity. Shields are going up right now. Your science consoles, the ones you actually need, are upstairs on the bridge in the upper section of the ship. So you ask someone where the turbolift is, and the crewman looks at you with the patient expression of someone explaining gravity to a child. There is no turbolift. The pylons are too thin. There is no physical way to get from here to up there. Your only option is the cargo transporter. But the shields are live, and there is not enough power to safely beam organic matter between sections. The solar flare could last for days, and you have been holding it in for over an hour. This is not a malfunction. This is not a system failure. This is just Tuesday on the Oberth class, and it is exactly what we are going to unpack today. The Oberth class made its screen debut in 1984, introduced in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, as the USS Grissom, a quiet little science vessel assigned to study the newly formed Genesis planet. It did not survive the film. A Klingon bird of prey reduced it to debris within minutes of arriving on screen, and the crew barely had time to be characters before they were gone. And yet the ship itself refused to die. It kept reappearing across the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and two separate Borg invasion fleets. It served Starfleet for over a century, despite looking like something that went through the replicator wrong. Today we are going to do three things. First, we are going to examine every reason this design should not work, and we are going to be honest about how genuinely absurd some of it is. Then we are going to follow a very specific trail of evidence that most fans have overlooked for 40 years. And by the end of this video, you are going to see the Oberth class not as the worst designed ship in Starfleet, but as possibly one of the most cleverly engineered vessels in the entire fleet. That is the case we are making today. Let us establish what we are actually dealing with. The Oberth class is a Federation science vessel, officially listed at roughly 120 meters in length, about 1/3 the size of a Constitution-class cruiser like the Enterprise, and comparable in overall mass to a Klingon bird of prey. It's a small ship with a minimum crew of just 5, pushing a standard complement of 80 personnel across 13 compact decks. Its primary mission? Pure scientific study, astronomical research, planetary surveys, long-range sensor operations in deep space, and reconnaissance work on the edges of known space. It was never a warship, never intended to be one, and nothing about its design pretends otherwise. But the moment you look at an Oberth class, really look at it, something immediately feels architecturally wrong. The ship is divided into two completely separate halves. The top section is the primary hull, the bridge, crew quarters, operational systems, the nerve center of the entire vessel. The bottom section is the secondary hull, home to the scientific laboratories and the heavy sensor arrays that make the Oberth worth deploying in the first place. And between these two halves, a pair of thin structural pylons. Two narrow arms bridging the gap between the top of the ship and the bottom. No neck, no central corridor, no spine running the length of the design to hold the two sections in meaningful contact. Just those pylons, doing all the structural work, while every engineer in the audience already feels the dread building. Here is where the Oberth class stops being merely unusual and starts being genuinely inexplicable. If your science staff is working in the lower section and your command crew is operating on the bridge above, how does anyone actually move between them? On every other Starfleet vessel in the fleet, you ride a turbolift, a standard vertical transit system that threads through the ship's internal framework. But on the Oberth class, those connecting pylons are so structurally thin that they cannot physically accommodate a turbolift shaft. There is no room. There is no corridor. There is no ladder. The only mechanism available for crew transit between the two halves of the ship is a transporter, meaning every single time a scientist needs to move from the lab deck to the bridge, they must be disassembled at the molecular level and reconstructed somewhere else. This is not a minor inconvenience. Think about the operational reality. You are 3 weeks into a deep space survey mission. Your experiments are running in the lower section. Your data is feeding into consoles upstairs, and every cup of tea, every equipment check, every casual conversation between departments requires a transporter cycle. Now layer in shields. The moment the ship encounters a radiation belt, a hostile vessel, or a solar plasma event, the shields activate and transporter operations lose power priority. The lower section crew is now completely sealed off. No way up, no emergency egress, no access to the rest of their own ship. But it gets structurally worse. The lower section has no living quarters, and reportedly, no crew facilities whatsoever. For a ship designed to spend months at a time in the deep black, the decision to deploy science personnel into a section with no bathroom is not just an oversight, it is engineering malpractice on a civilizational scale. And then there is the plasma problem. If the warp core is located in the lower hull, as it is on most Federation vessels, then superheated warp plasma must flow upward through those fragile, narrow connecting pylons. Federation starship design is built around one core safety principle. Keep your catastrophic systems physically separated. Running a river of plasma hot enough to vaporize bulkheads through the narrowest, most structurally vulnerable point on the ship is not a design choice. It is a confession, and if those pylons take a single direct hit in combat, the bottom half of the ship simply falls away. Anyone working below is now adrift in a sealed metal compartment with no propulsion, no docking capability, and no hope of return under their own power. This is the ship Starfleet built. This is the ship they kept building for over a century. The question that has echoed across Trek fandom since 1984 is as simple as it is infuriating. Why? Now here is where things stop being a list of problems and start becoming an investigation, because there is a piece of evidence sitting in plain sight that most fans have dismissed as a trivial historical mix-up. It is not a mix-up, it is a clue. When the Oberth class first appeared in Star Trek III, the only written documentation most fans could find on this vessel came not from official Starfleet manuals, but from a tabletop game, the Starship Tactical Combat Simulator, published by FASA in the 1980s. In that game, the USS Grissom was listed as a Gagarin-class vessel, named after cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, the first human to reach orbit. That designation burned itself into the memory of a generation of fans, because for years it was the only written source anyone had, and it felt completely official. But then the canon record shifted. The vessel was officially recognized as Oberth class, named after Hermann Oberth, the German rocket pioneer who helped build the theoretical foundation for modern spaceflight. Later FASA supplements tried to reconcile the gap, describing the Oberth as a new class specifically designed to replace the weaker, outdated Gagarin. Most fans read this as a messy continuity error. Two names competing for the same ship, with nobody in charge willing to make a final call. But what if that is exactly the wrong way to read it? What if those two names do not describe the same vessel? What if Gagarin and Oberth are two different configurations of the same platform? And the fact that both designations feel partially correct is not a mistake in the record, but a reflection of a deliberate design strategy that Starfleet never bothered to advertise. Follow that thread, and the entire mystery unravels. The central question about the Oberth class has always been this: why does the lower section seem so fundamentally disconnected from the ship's operations? The answer is because it is, not due to poor planning, by design. Look at the upper section of the Oberth class in isolation. It has a bridge, crew quarters, impulse engines, and warp nacelles mounted flush to its sides. It is, on its own, a complete and fully operational starship, compact, self-sufficient, and entirely capable of independent flight. Now look at the lower section. It does not look like a crew habitat because it was never intended to be one. It looks like a pod, a large, oblong external module hanging beneath the primary vessel, because that is exactly what it is, a detachable, mission-specific science pod. This reframing is not speculation for its own sake. It resolves every single engineering problem we spent the last section cataloging. There is no turbolift because you do not run a turbolift from your ship into an attached payload module. You use a transporter or a controlled docking port, which Memory Alpha confirms the lower hull actually has on the port side. Crew access is deliberate and transactional, not casual, because the pod is not crew space, it is equipment space. The pod can house dedicated deep space sensor arrays tuned to a specific mission profile, operating on their own independent power supply so they never compete with the main ship's systems. It can carry mission-specific scientific instruments, cargo, or supply modules for forward deployments. It can be swapped out entirely when the mission changes. A stellar observation pod for one assignment, a geological survey module for the next, a long-range communications array for classified deep space operations, a cargo module for resupply runs to remote outposts. Under this reading, the Oberth class is not a poorly designed science ship. It is a modular mission platform, a compact, warp-capable hull capable of being configured and reconfigured for almost any support role Starfleet could imagine, simply by changing what hangs beneath it. Now bring back the naming conflict, because it is no longer a conflict. If the upper section, the self-contained, independently operational vessel, is the Gagarin class, then the Gagarin is the base platform. the ship itself. And if the Oberth class designation refers specifically to the Gagarin fitted with a science module beneath it, then Oberth is not a replacement for Gagarin. It is a mission state. Two names for two configurations of the same hull. The Gagarin class answers the question, what is this vessel? The Oberth class answers the question, what is this vessel doing right now? That framing explains why both designations circulated for decades without either one being clearly wrong, and it transforms what looked like a continuity error into something that reads like deliberate operational classification. The Gagarin puts on a science pod and becomes the Oberth. It is modular starship design, and once you see it, the entire history of this vessel clicks into place. With the modular framework established, the biggest remaining question answers itself. Why did Starfleet keep building and deploying the Oberth class for over 100 years? Because truly versatile platforms do not become obsolete. The Oberth was not just a science ship, it was a support hull that could become a science vessel, a resupply transport, a warp-capable tug, or a forward sensor platform, depending entirely on which module it was carrying that week. And there is one more technical detail that reframes the Oberth's reputation entirely. Its interior bulkheads are constructed from a material called Victorium alloy, and its shields are specifically engineered to push through gravitational wavefronts, the kind generated by pulsars, collapsing stars, and extreme spatial phenomena. This is not a warship that got built too small. This is a vessel specifically designed to operate in environments where other ships cannot function without being torn apart. The pod separation is not a structural weakness in that context. It is a deliberate safety buffer, keeping your high-output sensor arrays physically distant from your crew when you are running them inside a radiation environment that would cook unshielded electronics. This is also why Starfleet was comfortable sending the Oberth into fleet engagements at Wolf 359 and Sector 001 and keeping it in service through the Dominion War. You do not redeploy a ship for a century unless it is quietly exceptional at something. Of course, none of this elegant logic was the original intention. The Oberth class was not born from a design philosophy. It was born from a Hollywood accident. Industrial light and magic designers were handed a brief for Star Trek III. Build a small, unglamorous research vessel, fast and cheap. They sketched a rough working concept, fully intending to refine the proportions and work out the interior layout before production began. Then the producers walked into the room, saw the preliminary sketch tacked to the wall, and made a snap decision. That one. Build that one. The model went into production before anyone had worked out how the crew was actually supposed to function inside it, before the layout was resolved, and before anyone asked the question that fans would spend 40 years trying to answer. That is the honest origin of the ship, a deadline, a hallway conversation, and a sketch that was never meant to be final. But the remarkable thing about the Oberth class is what happened after. The fandom looked at this accidental geometry for 4 decades and found a theory inside it that makes the design more coherent, more purposeful, and more interesting than the designers ever intended. The answer was never in the blueprints because the blueprints were never finished. The answer belongs entirely to the people who refused to stop asking the question. So let us return one final time to that scientist, standing in the lower section, shields up, transporter offline, looking for a quiet corner and a cup. In the old reading of the Oberth class, this is a story about negligence, a ship so badly designed that its own crew cannot safely operate inside it. In the new reading, this scientist is not trapped inside a flaw. They are working inside a specialized external module, a detachable science pod clipped beneath a fully capable starship, deliberately isolated from the crew section so that its sensors can operate at full intensity inside a plasma environment that would make a transporter beam irrelevant anyway. The discomfort is not a mistake. It is the cost of doing science that no other ship in the fleet could manage. For 40 years, the Trek fandom did what fandom always does. It looked at the ugliest, most fragile-looking vessel in Starfleet and laughed. Then it looked closer, and it found that the ship dismissed as an engineering embarrassment was actually a masterclass in operational utility, hiding in plain sight beneath a silhouette nobody thought was worth defending. Brilliant design does not always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like a mistake until the moment you understand what it was actually trying to do. The Oberth class is proof of that, and the USS Grissom? She went out doing exactly what she was built for, right up close to something extraordinary, sensors running hot, crew doing science at the edge of everything. That is not a bad way to go. Drop your own theories in the comments. What do you think that lower module was really carrying? Until next time.